one of the things that I really like, and Diana actually mentioned this, which is so great, is just reading a ton of whatever it is you want to write in. And Candace Ransom, also brilliant person, great picture book writer, she said, check out, you know, like 50 books picture books from the library. And as you read them, this is why I have my own shelf of my book library, because they're like, Marcie has 40 books. So I order them because I can order them from all over my system. There's several counties share libraries, so my library wouldn't necessarily have them all. So I order them, have them sent in, and then it's a bonus is if you're a parent, this is great. I mean, if you have young kids, you're doing double duty every night when you read to your kids. You're reading because your kids need to hear you read, and you're doing research. And so, you know, if I'm really, really tired, I'm just like, I really don't want to read tonight, but oh, but this is good for me as a writer, it's good for me as a mom. And one of the things that she said to do is to take your picture books and you set them into 3 piles. And she says, one pile is books, you're just like, I really don't care for this book. I'm not going to tell you any books that I really don't particularly care for, and it has nothing to do with them as books. It has to do with, they just didn't speak to me. So obviously they were good enough to get published, that's not the issue, but they're just like, I don't really want to read this book again, and it's also not a book that I would want to write. So that's the book that you're just going to put in one pile. In the second pile, you're going to be like, oh, I love this book, but it's just not something that I don't think this is something that I could ever write. For me, books like Mo Willems, I love him, I love his books. My brain does not think that way. Like when I go sit down to write, that is not the kind of book that comes into my brain. And I don't know that it ever will one day. But as for me as a writer right now, that's not a book that I'm going to be coming up with. Then there's your third pile, is the book that, wow, I love this book, and not only do I love it, it's the kind of book I want to write. So then that's the stack you're going to be studying. These other 2 are probably not going to be the ones you're going to want to study. Other than, like, why would I not want to write it? But that doesn't really help you. So that third pile, so you have 50 books and you might have 5 or 10 that are really the ones that you're like, oh, I love this book and this is the, you know, the ones. That's my 3 piles technique that I stole from someone else. So the next thing I do with students is I actually have them keep a notebook of, like, I type up things that I want to have them study. So sometimes I don't type up the entire text. Well, I don't ever give kids the entire text typed up. I usually just give them a piece of it. But when I'm studying for myself, sometimes I read something and when you have that moment when you're reading as just a reader and you're like, whoa, you know, that moment that makes you stop, causes emotion, or it causes you just to be like, wow, that was amazing. Like, that's when you need to stop and mark it. Like, you don't have to stop and do it while you're reading the book, because if you're just reading for pleasure, sometimes this can be kind of problematic that I can't really read for pleasure much anymore. But you can actually just put a sticky note on it, or, you know, bookmark it on your Kindle and come back to it. And that's what I did when I was reading Lizzie Bright and the Buckminster Boy by Gary Schmidt. And it's a middle grade novel, historical. And I was reading this book and I was like, wow, I learned a lot about this one minor character in very short little paragraph, several sentences. And I actually did this with my 4th graders because I was using it as a writer myself. And if you'll just pass this around, you can write on this. I tell kids, we write all over the text. So when you type it up, you can do that. You can't write in real books. So I actually had a friend too that, you know, she actually put it on overhead back when we used to have overheads. Now I just either put it on the screen and we write on it on there, or I give every kid a copy and they can make their own notes. But you can make your own notes as we talk about this particular text. And I will just read it briefly. And I'll tell you what I noticed about it. This is the first glimpse we get of a minor character. Her name is Mrs. Elia. I don't know if it's or Elia Hurd. And then across the road, the strawberry door on the sunlight-shuttered house opened, and a tiny, frail bird of a woman stepped out. Turner, this is the main character, figured she had reached her peak of height sometime around the Civil War, and from that time on had been folding and shrinking until someday she would probably just disappear. The white of her dress had faded to yellow and matched her skin almost precisely. One hand held a pale blue shawl tight around her chest, and the other held a book, which she used to beckon him. So what I think is so fabulous about this piece of art, first of all, I was like, wow, I learned an awful lot about this one character from, 4 sentences? And I have a complete picture of what she looks like. I have a just very vivid picture of what she looks like. But I also love the technique, and you know, I don't know if he consciously, he's writing consciously this. As you're writing, this just sort of becomes who you are, but that you start off from a distance, and you are basically, then he zooms you in 4 or 5 sentences, he zooms you in all the way to her hands. So we get the view of the door, and there's a woman who's standing at the door. And so then you go to her, and he doesn't say that she's old. You know that she had been folding and shrinking since the Civil War. Since the Civil War. You get the idea that she's old because of the way the character describes her. So we see his point of view. We learn a lot about the character, the main character, by the way he describes this particular woman. We get colors, strawberry, the yellow on her dress, the white and the yellow, her skin is yellow, the pale blue shawl. There's a lot of colors in these 4 sentences. Textures. So what I really loved is just this whole zooming in technique that he used. And so what I did, I really wasn't particularly working, actually I technically was. I was working on this book, my middle grade book, and I was really struggling with like, what am I going to do next? I didn't really know what scene I was going to write next. I knew that I wanted to have a particular scene happen. And so I just used this technique of my main character, and she's sitting on her porch, and her best friend lives next door, and he's coming across a field to bring her a letter from her sister who has run away from home. And I used the totally different plot, totally different characters, totally different style altogether, but I used this technique. I loved how he used this, the textures and the colors and the moving the camera lens basically from way out to close up. And then it is part of my book at the moment, but it's so, you would never know it. Like you would never know that I learned that from him because it's so different. It was a great way for me to say, I'm just going to try this scene, and I think I'm going to do this idea that just the way that he did that. It was just sort of a tool in my toolbox. If you're struggling with how do you tell, how am I going to let this person know about this character or about this, how am I going to set up this scene? Sometimes just looking at how somebody else does it will kind of jog your memory, or jog whatever's loose in your, it's not working out. Notes, or if you do a lot of things that are very spare text, I would highly recommend Linda Ashman's website. She's very generous as far as giving you, you can download what her manuscript looked like, because she's written some, Linda Ashman. She's also written a great book about writing picture books. I think it's called The Nuts and Bolts of Writing Picture Books. Mm-hmm. It's great, but a lot of resources are on her website, but I could wrap my head around how, if you're just a writer and you're not an illustrator, how would you write up a text that's so spare and make someone understand it? And she's got great examples of how she did that. So you can actually see what it looked like when she turned into her age. Yeah, and I think this is where typing the text would really help you, because I think even with Puddle Pug, when I typed that one out, there's so many cool things in here. And okay, so here's an example. She says, all of Percy's puddles were pleasing, but yet he had to find the perfect puddle. And again, you're using that onomatopoeia, it's all this poetic language, every word counts. But she says, some were nearly perfect, like this one, and this one, and this one, but something was always missing. Here she could have talked about each particular one, but she left room for the illustrator.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that was original and it was taken out later, but when I was typing that up, I was like, wow, she really didn't write. Now she did over here, in the beginning, swamp puddles, stomp puddles, ready for romp puddles, foggy puddles, froggy puddles, deeper than the doggy puddles. There she kind of gave you, but she still, left him room, some fun things to illustrate.
Yeah.
So I think, studying that kind of thing, and not with pictures.
Yes.
When you type it up and you just look at the text, that's so helpful, because we're so ingrained in looking at the two together. It's so much a part of what picture books are. But if you're not an illustrator, then you kind of have to think about, how could I leave room for an illustrator?